Hey everyone, just wanted to announce that I am now working with a small local company named People's Choice Companies LLC to sell merchandise and products on Etsy. Consider supporting me and the small company by purchasing stuff on the Etsy store. Link is in the description. I am also helping out with a GoFundMe, also by People's Choice Companies, linked to helping create projects for struggling people. Consider donating to help out with that. Link it will be also in the description. Alright, thanks. Now back to the video. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is an especially important part of my childhood. It was one of the very first video games I've ever played, and while I was much too young to comprehend the game at the time, I was fully captivated with the game's world, visuals, and especially the music. It was magical and awe-inspiring, and over the years, my love and appreciation for Majora's Mask grew, with its beautiful yet sad story, amazing gameplay, living and breathing world with so much to do, and powerful themes of grief and coming to terms with death and tragedy. At least that's what I took from the game. It's the game that gave birth to my love and fascination with video games, and as such, will always be a game I hold with high importance, even if parts of the game are somewhat dated in retrospect. But little did I know at the time that Majora's Mask was born out of a lack of will to work on another Zelda project, and how a little bet between two legendary game designers will give rise to such an important title. It's a story that is very fascinating, and I want to talk about it. So, today on Beta Quest, I will be talking about the beta and development of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Development on Majora's Mask began in January of 1999, and was led by Ocarina of Time's dungeon designer Eiji Aonuma. At the time, Aonuma and his team were busy working on an expansion to Ocarina of Time titled Ura Zelda, which is going to be released on the Nintendo 64 disk drive. Now, I will talk about Ura Zelda in a later video, but for now, the idea behind Ura Zelda was that it was going to be an expansion that would have not only remixed the existing content of Ocarina of Time with redesigned dungeons and relocated content, but was also going to add in new features such as new quests, side quests, dungeons, Easter eggs, and many other features. Unfortunately, Aonuma wasn't happy with working on this expansion, as he already spent years working on the perfect dungeons and didn't want to mess with them. Not to mention, he wanted to make a new Zelda game instead, and felt that an Ocarina of Time expansion was just not progressive enough. As such, Aonuma expressed his dissatisfaction towards Miyamoto about how much he didn't like Ura Zelda and wanted to make a new game instead. What would happen is that the two of them would strike a bargain. If Aonuma could create a new Zelda game within a single year, then they wouldn't have to finish Ura Zelda. To me, this just strikes me as hilarious, since it sounds so much like something two children would do. But, I mean, look at what happened in the end. Granted, Miyamoto wasn't going to just leave Aonuma in the dirt, and would actually help out in the development process as well, as a producer. But I have to admit one thing. Now, as I've already expressed, I love Majora's Mask, but did it really have to come at the cost of Ura Zelda? I mean, I know that if Ura Zelda came out, we wouldn't have Majora's Mask, but could someone else have taken care of Ura Zelda? Maybe Miyamoto? I don't know. Get someone else so we can get Ura Zelda as well? I mean, I guess we did kind of get Ura Zelda in the end with Master Quest, which is a discussion for that other video, but whatever. Would have been cool to have Ura Zelda though, but I mean, yeah. The new Zelda game would be announced as Zelda Gaiden, meaning Zelda Side Story, and would be announced as an N64DD expansion to Ocarina of Time, which would require the Ocarina of Time cartridge to be plugged into the base N64 and the Zelda Gaiden expansion onto the N64DD. However, at some point during development, I would say halfway through, the project will be moved from the N64DD to the base N64 because it was clear that the N64DD was pretty much dead before and on arrival on its release in December of 1999, and Nintendo obviously wanted this game to sell. So the project was converted to a standalone cartridge format, but would use the expansion pack, that RAM expansion pack, to kind of keep the project on the same track without cutting for space or processing power. This transition to the N64DD would also come with a new name, Majora's Mask, which was decided upon because the team wanted to reinvent the game, with the name coming from a hybrid of Takaya Imamura's last name and the movie Jumanji. Hey, I love that movie. Regardless, if anything got cut or changed due to the game no longer having access to the features of the N64DD, such as the internal clock and rewritable discs, then I have no clue what they were because I can't really find anything about that, unfortunately. Perhaps nothing got cut because the extra RAM from the expansion pack allowed for those features to be kept, perhaps redone as software rather than hardware. Anyway, the game was primarily inspired by a movie called Run Lola Run, which was a movie about time where the film, broken up into three segments, would restart over the course of the film, and things would start off the same at first, but would progress differently each time. Developer Yoshiaki Koizumi found the concept of the movie very fascinating and used the idea for a board game project where the player would have a week to try and stop the villain in a world that was small in scope but filled to the brim with content. However, the game would ultimately be cancelled, but the core concepts, along with the time loop premise of Run Lola Run, would serve as the basis for Majora's Mask's premise, which also include a 7-day time limit. Ah, yes, the time limit. That thing people hate because it gives them so much stress when playing the game. And yes, you heard me right, the time limit was originally going to be 7 days instead of 3. This was because Zelda Gaiden was going to take advantage of the N64DD's internal clock, and it also just made sense. A week sounds good, and you can also find remnants of this 7-day system in the game's internal code. However, as development progressed, the team found out that the 7-day thing was just going to be too much, both for the developers to try and produce 7 days of content within their short development time, and the player for trying to keep up with everything. Not to mention, developers feared that the 7-day cycle would cause players to get bored, like they would have to sit through an entire week just to get things done all over again. In the end, the 7-day system was reduced to 3 days, which helped tremendously for developers. Probably not for the players and their stress level though. Koizumi also produced the moon scenario following a daydream about what would happen if the moon fell to the earth. He wondered how people would respond, how they would feel and react to something like this happening, and this highly intriguing scenario would be added to the game, of course. To meet the 1 year deadline, the game would reuse pretty much everything from Ocarina of Time, but would use them in new and alternative ways to make the game feel new, as well as update and improve the visuals via a better understanding of the hardware and the additional power through the expansion pack. On top of that, ideas, concepts, and content that was cut from Ocarina of Time, as well as concepts that were intended to appear in Zelda, would find their way into Majora's Mask, also to save on time as well as to make proper use of these scrapped concepts, per the Nintendo norm. As well as, well, they likely knew Zelda wasn't going to be properly finished. This would be supported with data mining in Ocarina of Time and the 2020 and 2021 Nintendo Giga Leaks and ROM dumps showcasing models and locations that were pretty much reused in Majora's Mask, such as the Beneath the Well area, the spider houses.
And bees.
Yeah, that last one isn't that impressive, but still, you get the point. One of the planned features of Zelda that would be expanded into the main theme of the game was the use of masks, which was going to be a part of an expanded mask side quest in Zelda, and this was chosen because the team knew that the masks were not fully utilized in the original Ocarina of Time. From this, it was decided to not only have a crap ton of masks with unique features and scenarios tied to them and make masks part of the story and world, but several of them would allow Link to transform into other beings via horrifying animations that I believe were revealed to actually be the sorrows and regrets of the spirits in the mask flooding Link's mind. However, not everything intended for Majora's Mask made it into the game, sadly. One of the planned features for the game was that Majora's Mask was going to feature an expanded fishing minigame titled Jabu Jabu's Fishing, where you could play the game for rupees and there were some graphics and items created and or reused for it, such as some fish graphics and the fishing rod, but for whatever reason this was cut. It was even said by Miyamoto, probably as a joke, that you could catch Jabu Jabu and this would somehow stop the moon from falling, perhaps as an alternative ending to the game. Even if this was just a joke ending, this would have been nice to see. I must state that the fishing minigame was re implemented in the 3DS version of Majora's Mask, which is neat, but sadly, the Jabu Jabu equivalent does not stop the moon from falling, which is unfortunate. I kind of wish he did, but whatever. Another cut feature was that apparently the team was thinking about incorporating Game Boy functionality via the Game Boy Transfer Pack. Although what this was supposed to be, I have no clue and seemed like the idea was dropped pretty early. Perhaps the most unfortunate exclusion, likely also a joke, was that Miyamoto stated that there was originally going to be a merchant who sold literal time for rupees, literally allowing the player to buy time. But if it even existed beyond this joke, then it was, well, I mean, as I said, also removed for whatever reason. Maybe they couldn't get it to work right, or it undercut the tension or theming. I don't know, but I bet some of you are mad about that. There are also a couple characters found in the concept art that can't be seen in the final game, likely because of time restraints. In particular, this weird Link looking guy, whom some have theorized was the Termina counterpart to Link. This would have been awesome to see, but as we know, this didn't really go anywhere, although the idea for an alternate counterpart to Link would be revisited in future games, such as Link Between Worlds. Also, looking in the concept art, we can see that Majora's Mask seems to have originally went for a far more Mesoamerican aesthetic, far heavier than what we would ultimately get in the final game, which does kind of have a Mesoamerican influence, but not as heavy as you see here. This was likely to give Majora's Mask a more unique look and feel from Ocarina of Time's more European fantasy-inspired approach, while going full force with a mask idea, as masks and faces are especially important in the Mesoamerican cultures. It seemed like Nintendo originally wanted Majora's Mask to go full on Mesoamerican, and seemed like Nintendo was trying to do so based on these beta screenshots of Majora's Mask showcasing these more colorful environments and designs. However, it's possible that time restraints forced Nintendo to dial back the Mesoamerican influences dramatically, so they could just kind of stick to just reusing Ocarina Time assets and make a world that didn't make those assets look out of place. At least, that's just my speculation. It's not entirely gone, as the influences of Mesoamerican culture can be felt in some areas of the game, like Clock Tower and the Southern Swamp, plus with the designs of the bosses and the giants and stuff. But, I kind of wish we still got a full on Mesoamerican Zelda. That would have been awesome. Let's hope Nintendo considers the idea for a future game. Maybe Tears of the Kingdom with that Zonai stuff? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, the game will be shown off in Space World of 1999 under the Zelda Gaiden title, with the Majora's Mask name introduced the following year. And the trailers and screenshots present around this time showed off some very interesting and key differences between this and the final version. Early screenshots showed that the game used a lot more assets from Ocarina of Time, including Link's character model and some of his weapons, like the original Kokiri sword and the Deku shield, which would ultimately be replaced with, well, obviously the new graphics and assets in the final game. It wasn't really a lot, but it was like they replaced Link's character model, or at least they updated it, and they modified the Kokiri sword and replaced the Deku shield with, well, obviously the hero shield. Though admittedly, kind of wish they kept the same shield dynamic mechanics, the shield stuff from Ocarina of Time with the Deku shield and the Hylian shield. But that's just me. Speaking of recycled stuff, a lot of other assets from Ocarina of Time remain in the game, albeit unused, such as these old item graphics, and a few songs, like Saria's song and the Sun song. Weirdly enough, while Saria's song has no purpose, the Sun song actually does cause the day to transition, albeit in real time rather than through a cutscene. It's possible that this was going to be the song used for day transition rather than the song of double time, but perhaps the real-time day transitions were causing problems for the game and its code, so it was decided to simply replace the song to circumvent the issue. Either that, or they just wanted to replace the song with something more thematically appropriate considering the existence of the inverted Song of Time. But I'm not sure. That's just that the whole thing was just speculation. Putting that aside, a lot of the world was also radically different in the original version, with some areas having radically different maps like Stone Tower here, while some areas had radically different textures, such as the outside Clock Town, going with this look. As mentioned before, early concept art showed that Nintendo thought of using a Mesoamerican approach throughout the whole game, and these screenshots showed a very Mesoamerican influence was being attempted in more parts of the game. However, again, this will be dramatically pulled back in the final game, where the influence can kind of be seen in the final game in some areas, but far from the heavy doses seen in the original concepts and plans, and the screenshots too. The 2020 and 2021 Giga League also revealed a radically different Great Bay area as well, which featured an altered version of the Gerudo archery track from Ocarina of Time, an additional cave area, and perhaps an early version of the Great Bay Temple area, which likely was changed to make the area look better and a little more efficient. Although admittedly, I kinda wish they kept that archery track, but that's just my opinion. Screenshots also revealed the inclusion of an adult Link face as an item, which was tied to an idea to have a mask that could allow Link to immediately transform into an adult, and there was concept art made for adult Link in Majora's Mask, complete with an updated design. However, this idea was scrapped and replaced with the Fierce Deity's mask. It's possible that the idea of transforming into adult Link seemed either pretty pointless, because young Link could do a lot of the stuff adult Link could do now, or it would take way too long to design the game for both Links in mind and make it all work within the year-long development schedule. Screenshots also showed that the Ocarina of Time would change its icon to the appropriate instrument depending on which mask you had on, although despite the icons still existing in the final game, this wasn't included in the final, though it was re-implemented in the 3DS version, which is cool. Screenshots also suggested that the mask transformation would use items in the game rather than magical or innate abilities, such as Goron Link using the Megaton Hammer, Zora Link with the Long Shot, and Deku Link with the Deku Nuts. It's likely that this was to keep in continuity with established Zelda canon and implications, with the Megaton Hammer being a legendary Goron weapon, the Hook Shot being associated with the Zora, and the Deku Nuts being the Deku's natural weapon. However, this would ultimately be changed in the final game to the Goron punches, Zora boomerangs, and the snot bubbles respectively. And while no reason was given, it's likely that the original version didn't really work out well for the gameplay and they had to change it to make it work better. Screenshots also, I keep saying that, but they also show that the moon had no face originally, and this was also reflected in the game's concept art, although it's possible that Nintendo felt that adding a face would be more powerful and impacting. Whatever the reason was, they added the face in the final version. And one last time, screenshots, as well as unused code, also suggested that there were some removed side quests, such as this mini game where you collected sticks for the Beaver Brothers, likely to help them build a dam. And there were some characters from Ocarina of Time that were updated to appear in Majora's Mask, but were left unused for some reason.
Hey, wait a second. What was that? Oh my goodness. Holy shit. What the hell's that? Let's move on.
One final thing I find funny is that there's several unused cutscenes in the game's files that showed Link training with the Great Fairies for his new upgrades, to which some seem to be tied to the player having to try out their new abilities. While I find these to be pretty funny and cool, they were removed in the final version. For some reason. Not sure why, but whatever. Regardless, after a couple months of showing the game off, the game will be released in Japan on April of 2000, with international releases on October and November of that year for USA and Europe respectively. The game received critical acclaim for its gameplay, themes, and darker tone, albeit to sales half as good as Ocarina of Time, unfortunately. But hold on just a flipping second, K Steel. How come international territories got Majora's Mask far later than Japan? That's quite a long time. Well, unlike most other games, Majora's Mask's localization took several months to complete, with the difference between the Japanese and American launches being half a year. This was because it was decided to run the game through not only an extensive localization effort, but to also improve certain aspects of the game at the cost of some other aspects. Some of the changes are minor, such as some minor graphical alterations and item relocations, and the usual censorship, but there are a few big standout alterations that are present. One of these substantial changes was modifying the water level in the Great Bay location, or at least modifying that laboratory area, so players don't have to jump on that platform in the laboratory area like in the Japanese version. And by that I mean using Zora Link to swim jump onto that platform. But whatever. Another substantial change was to simplify the Deku Palace grotto sequence, removing the lengthy grotto pathway in favor of one easy to reach grotto to make the sequence less frustrating. But the biggest change was the inclusion of the OWL save system, which was added to make saving progress slightly less annoying for players, as in the Japanese version, players could only save with the Song of Time. Considering that this would be very annoying and inconvenient, this additional save was appreciated. But due to this taking up a lot of memory and not fitting on the cartridge, several things had to be removed to fit the thing into the game, primarily removing the third save file. Well, you win some, you lose some. Such is life. Sometimes. And another thing that I just need to mention is that in the Got boss fight, I think that's how I pronounce it, the American version changed Link's placement so that he gets run over by Got in the intro part, where in the Japanese version he is in a safe position. Why they made this change, I have no clue. I guess we Americans just need that extra violence, I suppose, to be cool or something. I guess. Regardless, these giant changes made to the game were what got Majora's Mask delayed by several months, and despite the wait, fans of the N64 version would often consider the Western releases to be the optimum version of the game for these improvements to the gameplay and its efficiency. Now, before I go, I want to briefly talk about the 3DS remake because there really isn't a lot to talk about with the 3DS remake for an entire video, so consider this as a bonus. Despite re releasing Majora's Mask for several years on compilations and the Virtual Console, the release of the 3DS and the Ocarina of Time 3DS remake caused fans to wonder if Majora's Mask will receive the same treatment. However, for quite a while, Nintendo wasn't really talking about remaking Majora's Mask for 3DS, and fans were concerned that Majora's Mask was going to be ignored. So, to combat this, a major fan campaign called Operation Moonfall was launched in 2011, which was designed to make Nintendo know that there is demand for a 3DS remake of Majora's Mask. Operation Moonfall was inspired by an earlier campaign called Operation Rainfall, which was done to get several beloved Wii JRPGs to get released in the West. And it was a success, and fans were hoping that a similar thing would happen with Operation Moonfall. And it was a success, but not really because Nintendo was always going to do it apparently, but they just kept it a secret. So, yeah. Oh, okay then. Whatever. Development began in June of 2011, immediately after the release of Ocarina of Time 3D, but problems were arising with the 3DS remake, not out of production problems, but from lingering regrets from some of the developers over the original version. Al Numa looked back on the N64 original and was amazed at some parts of the game that he felt were bad game design and were alienating potential gamers, such as how the bosses were managed and how the swimming controls were done. Aonuma blamed this on the rushed development cycle and actually made a list of the things he felt were wrong with Majora's Mask and made sure to correct these problems when it came to the remake. And when the list was given to Grezzo, the company who developed the Ocarina of Time remake and were handling the Majora's Mask one as well, they provided their own list of changes as well. These changes, plus some elements from the then recently released A Link Between Worlds, would find their way into the remake, alongside some content that was cut from the original Majora's Mask, such as the fishing minigame and the alternate Ocarina of Time icons, and additional functionalities for the new Nintendo 3DS, since development took quite a bit. The hope was that these changes would be accepted by players and to make the game more forgiving and accessible to newcomers wanting to get into Majora's Mask. However, upon the February 2015 release of Majora's Mask 3D, while the game was a decent success with decent ratings, parts of the game were highly polarized among fans and critics. While the new additions and graphical overhaul were accepted, along with most of the gameplay still being that lovely gameplay from before, several changes, such as the movement and controls of the mask transformations, particularly the Zora swimming, the changes to the boss fights, and changes to the game's progression in some areas, would prove polarizing and unpopular with fans. Well, a good chunk of fans, I should say. Some saw these changes as improvements that did make the game fairer and more accessible, while most others would view these changes as making Majora's Mask ridiculous, particularly with the added eyeball weaknesses and the reverse Song of Time having weaker effects.
Some felt that these changes made Majora's Mask less unique, as these changes made the game a little more like the other Zelda games, even though people liked Majora's Mask because it stood out from other Zelda games due to its weird differences.
Regardless, players still enjoyed Majora's Mask 3D and didn't really hate it regardless of the polarizing changes. Well, some probably hated it for that reason, but most didn't. I personally loved it, although I do agree with some of the changes being bad, like the swimming, and they could have gone further and added more content that was scrapped, like the moon thing with the fishing minigame and the time merchant, but whatever. Weirdly enough, the game was based on the Japanese original Majora's Mask, realized through the placement of some items in the game rather than the later and improved versions found in the international releases, which was an odd choice, but whatever. And yes, the 3DS remake does have cut content as well, such as Gandorf and Sheik being in the fishing minigame at one point before being removed. But most of the cut stuff is mostly the same as before, such as the Great Fairy cutscenes, and there's nothing really significant about that stuff. And I already talked about it, so whatever. But that was the beta and development of Majora's Mask, and its 3D remake. It's crazy to see how disinterest in working on an expansion to Ocarina of Time is what ultimately led to one of the best Zelda games ever, in my opinion. As much as I really wanted that Zelda to come out as intended with the added content and all that, I must admit, if I had to choose between that and a new Zelda game, I'll take the new Zelda game any day. But even then, the concepts and ideas of Majora's Mask, especially ones that didn't make it to the final release, revealed a seemingly more unique and unusual game compared to what we got in the final. That's not to say that the final game is not unique or anything, but I would have loved to see these original ideas present in the final game, especially that more Mesoamerican influence in the aesthetics. But considering that the game had to be completed in 1 year, oh well, at least we got a great game in the end. Even if some developers didn't see parts of the game the way we did for the 3DS remake. Yeah. This has been K Still Beta Quest signing out. I will see you all later. This was a Cobalt Steel video by MS Bernie. Like, comment, and subscribe if you liked what you saw. Until next time, see you all later.